specific panel I'm really excited about. We're going to be talking about art and activism, about social justice, and some of the ideas that these creators have been exploring. So the three pieces that they created, Sutu created Future Dreaming.
Yep.
And Paisley created Unceded Territories, and Tamara created Another Dream. So my first question for you, the thing that first really strikes me with all of your pieces is there's really strong collaboration, and some of them they're hybrid, and to some extent the medium is hybrid because there is a lot of art involved, and you're an animator specifically, you worked with an artist, there's a lot of animation in your piece as well. So I'd love to have you talk about the collaborations that you did with artists, in your case kind of training some artists as well to bring art into your piece.
So my piece, these four young people in my piece, I've actually known them since they were about 11 and 12 years old. And back then when we did a project together where we created a comic book series, and I taught them how to use Photoshop and colouring in Photoshop. Like I would draw the comics, and then every day after school we'd do workshops, and they'd come in and use Wacom tablets to colour in the comics. So then jump forward to now, and I was always looking for another excuse to collaborate with these young people, and so then Tilt Brush came out, and it's this virtual reality painting software that's made by Google, and you put the headset on, and in under 2 minutes I could explain to you guys how to use the interface. It's really, really intuitive, super simple. Basically you just pull the trigger and you can start painting, and I showed it to these young people, and of course they were just freaking out and loving it. And I was like, well, this is good. Let's think about a story that we could create together. So that was kind of the beginning of the collaboration. And I could go on, but...
Well, it would be good just in terms of talking about, because the piece really becomes about them and their dreams. It's very much a documentary, and their stories of their hopes for life in the future beyond what perhaps is, expected of them as Indigenous Australians in the communities they're in. And I think it's really beautiful and powerful to see them imagining themselves in space. And so I'd love a little
Sure.
bit, yeah.
So then I pitched the idea to them. I was like, I want to interview you guys, and the interview, it's a really simple structure. Where are you going to be 1 week from now? Where are you going to be 5 years from now? And where are you going to be 20 years from now? And sort of at the time, there was a lot of pressure on young people to kind of be these kind of new icons and role models for the world. So I sort of laid down the caveat at the start. I was like, this can be a fun piece. You don't have to sort of live up to that expectation if you want, or you can, and you can be the first Aboriginal people in space if you want, or, I kind of threw out some scenarios there. And then also, I put together a PowerPoint presentation of all this kind of crazy futuristic technology that's existing today and kind of where we're heading to, just to kind of fill up their heads with some different ideas. And then it was just a really, really fun kind of Sunday afternoon where we just were hanging out, kind of having a round table conversation, throwing ideas back and forth. And it was kind of like a meditation, I guess. I want you to close your eyes, and I want you to really picture it. Okay, what day is it? Where are you 1 week from now? And then they'll be like, oh, I'm in my room. I was like, oh, is there anyone else there? It's like, is it a mess?
Tell us more.
Yeah, this, but you start building it out. And then they get some momentum. I was like, okay, that's a good warm up. So now we'll jump in 5 years from now. And after we came up with the story, we then moved into, okay, now I'm going to teach you how you can actually create your future using these painting tools. So then I worked with them as a mentor over a period of, we had basically their school holidays throughout the course of the year. So we just work every day in the 2 week periods for a 6 weeks. And then, but we had to break that up into just 2 weeks solid of doing a lot of the painting workshops and stuff like that. And I had to do a lot of refining and pulling the piece together. And then I also wanted them to animate their characters, so we used mocap. So I wanted it to be a collaboration where their footprint was throughout the whole project. So we put the mocap suit on them, and they had to kind of act out and learn their lines, and we kind of created a little set. And if he's talking about, oh, and there's my emus over there, we'd put a mic stand there and put a little piece of paper that says emu. So he'd be pointing at the emu. And we had that set at the same scale as the VR set. So he could actually put on the VR all the young people could put on the VR headset and walk around this kind of stage that we'd set up. And they would see, like, okay, I see, okay, that's where I live, and that's my emus over there, and there's the truck over there. Okay, and then I'll go walk over to the emus. Okay, we're going to put the stand right here, and then take the headset off. And they couldn't wear the headset when they were doing the performance because we also captured their faces. We had a little iPhone hanging off the front. And all this stuff was DIY, and I hadn't done it before, and we had to, like, make a little welding cap that just, like, a DIY kind of, like, hold the iPhone in front of their faces. And poor Allie, like, was like really heavy on her head. So it's like taking her expressions. So for a lot of the time, like, she always looked like she was frowning. So we had to really fix the headset up just so, like, fix that little mask up so that she looked like she was happy. Yeah, so that was, and then, yeah, the final phase of the project was then presenting it back to the community. So we live in a community of just 1,000 people in a really remote area of Australia. It's like 2,000 kilometres north of Perth, if you know where Perth is in Western Australia. And it was just like really beautiful thing. Like the whole community sort of came out. We had the young people doing a bit of live VR painting to start off the night, and then Maverick, who's one of the young people in the piece, he put the headset on, and you got to see his point of view projected, and everyone in the audience could see the experience from his point of view, and he kind of choreographed that just to be like really stable so that you could all see what it was. And then afterwards we invited the community to come and check it out, and we had like 3 VR stations set up. So it was like a whole sort of schedule that was planned over the course of the year. And there was a documentary playing in here.
There's a documentary playing in here that shows the process, yeah. So
everything I just said.
So you can see it a little, yeah, you can see it between the panels and afterwards as well. Yeah.
Totally.
Great. And Paisley, yours is with one individual artist who has a great and iconic body of work. So talk a bit about that, and certainly basing it on this series, this sort of manifesto of voidism as well.
Yeah, sure. So Lawrence Polly-Exwelupton and I made Unceded Territories, which is on display over there. And Unceded Territories refers to the fact that British Columbia, where we both live, is unceded land, has never been officially given over to Canada by the Indigenous people, so it's occupied territory. So we decided to create a project that you basically embody one of Lawrence's characters called the Super Predator, and they are like super evil characters who are like the 1%, like oil barons, people who are using the natural environment for their own gain. So if you go over there, I have a book and you can see some of his art. But one of the characters that we decided, we've made different masks, but this is the one for this event. This is the oil pipe head character. So you would wear this on top of the Oculus Rift S, and as you go into the virtual world, you embody this character. So as you create this art world that's entirely made of Lawrence's paintings and drawings, elements of it, you create, or you believe you discover this world, but as you create it by throwing paint, you're simultaneously destroying it with oil and fire, and you're surrounded by oil and destruct this beautiful place that you've just helped or think you've helped build. You're eaten whole by colonial snake, and then you go to the psychedelic ovoid underbelly of the beast. Yeah, that's basically it. And the music is by an incredible group called A Tribe Called Red, so I really recommend trying it out and destroying the earth. The idea behind all of it is that you would see, even if you think you have nothing to do with colonization or climate change, that you would see that you are an active participant in it, whether you like it or not. So it's a bit tongue-in-cheek. Lawrence is one of the most outspoken and influential contemporary painters in Canada, and very, very outspoken in his work. So that's kind of the attitude that we took in this piece.
Is the artwork based on Indigenous mythologies as well, or?
Yeah, totally. So a lot of his characters are directly from mythology, but it's just his art style that's kind of an evolution of Pacific Northwest Indigenous art. He's Cowichan and Okanagan, so that's where his art, like the art history comes from. But Lawrence's whole thing is that he makes art for a non-Indigenous audience. He wants to share his experience and his life as an Indigenous person with people through art, and it's an entry point to kind of subvert and fuck with people who might not expect it. Some of the things that are super exciting for me as a creator and a non-Indigenous person is that we got to work together to create this project, but it actually speaks to a piece that he made in 1992. So Lawrence is actually a pioneer of virtual reality, and that's how, like, Lawrence and I are friends, but I, like, basically stumbled onto the fact that he'd made this pioneering piece of VR. Lawrence had made this piece called Inherent Rights, Vision Rights, which invites audiences into the sacred space of the Longhouse, where you visit different spirit creatures. So in that space, he calls it the white man's mask. The computer system is housed in a plexiglass case, and then there's a wooden viewer that you look in, and then you enter the sacred space of the Longhouse. Technology has been used in the oppression of Indigenous First Nations people. And for him to use this technology to then share his perspective with audiences is extremely generous. But, 20 years has passed since 1992, and we decided to use technology that I had available to me because I've been working in VR for the last 5 years, and I have, I know the pipeline. Basically, we decided to work together because his work is so colorful and so vibrant. I just felt like it would look really, really cool in Unity. So that's part of the reason why we decided that was like the starting point. And then from there, we figured out how to use like interaction and choreography and color and texture and sound, like bring his paintings, which are, 2D, to life and animate them. All of those characters are made of the shape of the ovoid. And so the ovoid is a classic Pacific Northwest shape that's in a lot of First Nations art, but he basically plays with that concept and challenges expectations put on him by saying, like, I can do whatever I want with my art, and it's not just because, like, there's a tradition of art in front of me, like, I'm going to use this as an expression of freedom. But basically, every element in the world is using and playing with that concept of the ovoid as a modernist art movement.
My project that's exhibiting here is called Another Dream, and it's that way, and it's based on oral history recordings that I've been collecting for almost 10 years now. And it's part of a series called Queer in a Time of Forced Migration, which follows the journeys of LGBT refugees from the Middle East and North Africa to Europe, mostly different places in Europe. So the first part of the series was a film, an animated documentary called Half a Life, which premiered at the MoMA like 2 years ago and has toured around, and that shares the story of a gay rights activist in Egypt, and basically what makes you want to make the decision to leave your home, or what would force you to have to make that decision. And then the second part, Another Dream, follows a lesbian couple and explores more of what happens after you've made that decision and how do you make a new place your home. And this project started while I was living in Egypt, and the revolution broke out, and an Egyptian journalist friend and I, Nada El-Kouni, decided to travel around Egypt collecting oral histories for marginalized people, so mostly women and ethnic and religious minorities and LGBT people. And there was this sort of like sense of hope among the LGBT community that really stood out to me, where people really thought, okay, now like things are going to change, and there was like a gender rights like protest and movement, and something that after having lived in the Middle East for like almost 5 years at that point, like I hadn't really seen. So it was really exciting. And then throughout that process, I saw a lot of people that I knew and friends and people in my community having to leave and seek asylum elsewhere. And we all see the news and the way that people talk about refugees, and the stories and narratives that I saw being projected in there didn't match the people that I knew or my friends, and it also wasn't intersectional or inclusive of like what are the different reasons that somebody would have to leave. So that's why I decided to focus on these voices for this series. I don't know, I always think about this collaborative storytelling thing, because for me I would never imagine telling somebody else's story without having them be a part of it. To me it just seems like kind of like duh, like how could you not tell it collaboratively? But which says a lot, right? It's kind of sad that there are people who think that you can do that. No, I mean, I wouldn't honestly have finished this project. I've been working on it for almost 10 years if it wasn't for the people whose story I was telling, and they felt it was really important. They were involved in every aspect of it. In particular with the VR, it was interesting because the quality of the audio, since I been collecting it over so many years, varied. And when I started the interviews, it was all in Arabic and then switched to English. And it just, Arabic? Yeah, but so it wasn't working in in VR, and then we tested it with subtitles, and it really wasn't working. But so we had to do some re-recording, and I spoke to them because I was like, I don't want you to revisit something traumatic if you don't want to, and there's like that aspect of it, but they were like, you know, we want it to be really good, and if people can't hear it or they're gonna get dizzy reading, like, just let's do it, like, you can ask us, and just their openness and commitment to like these projects and kind of keeping me like, okay, is it finished yet? Like, when is it gonna be done? Like, what are you doing? It was like, okay, I really gotta finish this, you know, so that's kind of like what that relationship has been like. And as far as the animation and the artistic aspect of it, our piece mixes 3 different types of animation. So there's animation, traditional like cell animation, so frame by frame, that's done by hand. And some of it's painted by hand, and then we like scanned it, and it was painted for 360 environments. And then it also has 3D animation, so like modeling and stuff. And then there's another form of 3D animation. During that process, I realized there's different tools. There's tilt brush, and then there's quill. And I found this other, I felt like those 2 were kind of branded. Like I could see something and be like, okay, that was made in quill and that was made in tilt brush. So I wanted to have a little bit more flexibility. It led to a lot of problems afterwards with like the weight and of
like
these.
the size
And
of the file?
yeah, and also when they're animated, right? Because
Yeah.
so that was an optimization. That was something that we had to work with a lot.
We all use very kind of different styles, but then additionally, different ways of engaging the participant, the audiences, different ways of giving them agency within the piece. Did that affect how much, actual sort of user agency you decided to allow?
Yeah, I mean, oh, sorry.
No, yeah, go for
I mean, the reason the series, because the whole series is animated, is to protect the identity of the individual. So that was, like, animation was a big thing in as far as, like, how we chose to tell the story. In the art direction and, like, setting up the colors and all of that, that was something that I thought about a lot. And so animation allowed us to play with that more and keep their identities hidden, but it also, I think animation kind of like opens people up a little bit more because sometimes when you see like literal things, especially with stories that have some sort of like heavy social weight, it's like, yeah, you can go into someone's like refugee tent and like see the reality of it, but I feel like with animation, or at least when I'm working with it, I'm more trying to convey feelings or emotions through the visuals, and I have like control over how I'm crafting that, and it allows me more flexibility for being surreal and stuff like that.
From my experience, like the animation element allows you to apply your imagination to the story and also connect with it, whereas like realism, it speaks to everything that you're seeing. So in something like your project, like it allows you to have a really personal connection with them, I feel.
Yeah, that was kind of an interesting journey with figuring out the balance of interactivity, but the Arabic like interaction came because I had a hard time deciding to make it all in English, right? Because like the 2 characters in my story fell in love in Arabic. That's their language. It's where they came from. It's where the language I originally conducted the interviews in and all of this. But I knew that subtitles weren't going to really work in the setup. So I wanted there to be some sort of element of Arabic, especially because it's a language that has become so politicized. And I think that people always associate it with like political things or war, but it's also a language in which they fell in love with, and love happens in that, and there is beauty to it. So I wanted to make, I guess, people who are going to engage with the story also have to connect with that cultural aspect of it and interact with the language. So that's where that design aspect came for the interaction in that way, to maintain that sense of culture and I guess in it.
Can you explain for people who haven't seen the piece kind of exactly what happens, what you're kind of prompted to do?
Yeah, so in the piece, Another Dream, kind of the way that we describe it, is a hybrid virtual reality animated documentary and VR game in a sense, where there's game elements that help push the narrative forward. And to unlock each chapter of the story, you have to trace over a word in Arabic, and the words are inspired from things that they've said that reflect a kind of like that chapter of what, like, like I chose to leave, and then you trace over that, and then to find out what it means in English, and ultimately at the end you find out like the whole phrase, and it's supposed to be reflective of their journey.
We really wanted to play with agency, and one of the things that I like about virtual reality as opposed to just straight filmmaking is that you can play with people's expectations in the medium. So you expect to be able to interact with an interactive project, and the idea that you could take away those abilities to interact or challenge what you're doing is where I find it exciting and fun and really pisses people off in a way that I find really enjoyable. So when you go into unceded territories, you have the ability to throw paint, and that creates the world. So you're creating a delightful, like visually rich, colorful, natural landscape, all full of Lawrence's incredible art. The place where we mess with people's expectations and their agency in the world is by, once they're swallowed by colonial snake, their agency is gone. So your hands that you were once able to throw and interact with the world are gone, and so you're faced with the consequences of your actions of destroying the world. And that's where we really wanted to challenge people to think, like, I didn't realize I was ruining the world. Well, you did. So the truth is, no one has an option. Like, every single person who goes to the project has the same experience of creating the world and then that being taken away. But that's like the fun of the project, as well as the emotional impact of the piece.
Yeah.
We wanted to create something that was powerful and engaging, but also playful and, like, you know, uses the fun part of virtual reality and, like, the soundscape and, you know, these things that we can do in the space.
It also does make you kind of go, like, because you start shooting it out everywhere, and you're just like where does this end? You know, it's just like you want to push the system to its limit or something.
Yeah.
Kind of like there's a separate motivation there, which is an
Right.
interesting commentary onto itself, right? Like.
Yeah. Well, also, like, it's aggressive.
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
You're actually throwing and engaging in a world in a very, like, aggressive way. And that is sort of reflecting this, you know, destruction of the world that we are all complicit in. So, yeah, just a little fun 6-minute environmental action piece.
Well, I think we were talking about this a bit yesterday too. It's like, just when you're within, there are a lot of emotions that the pieces that those kinds of experiences trigger, and it is interesting to see. I think, I'm sure it's very interesting for as creators to play with that, but then when you're experiencing a piece, you start to realize too how you can easily be manipulated within the piece, which reflects on just in general how you can be manipulated within the real world and all of those emotions and triggers. And because you're an avatar or you're placed into different identities, you can be challenged.
Yeah, and like the other thing was, you're in Lawrence's world. You're in his virtual world. Like, we literally created this world, and Lawrence is the author of it. So to realize that even these spaces that are quite obviously someone else's world, like, bringing that even further by showing that there's even a messaging to the experience of navigating that world. Like, it's all authored by the creator. So that's where you can really play with expectation. And playing with people's emotional frustration in interaction is a place that I think, like, creators should be exploring, because that's where we can really start to play with getting engagement and pushing that boundary. These are the things that I'm interested in exploring.
My sort of emphasis was I really wanted the young people to be in the project, and we looked at different ways of trying to achieve that. And, like, I was really obsessed with, like, trying to get like volumetric video capture, but that was, like, at the time, which was only a year ago, like $5,000 per minute.
Oh my God.
Yeah, and so there's a couple of stages popping up around here in LA, but we don't have one in Australia, so that was just, like, not ever going to happen. So I wanted them to feel like they were gods of their own universes that they created, and which made it like this kind of weird mishmash kind of aesthetics, which I feel like, because it's like this sort of younger project, it's totally justified.
Yeah.
So I was okay with that, and I found, like, as being kind of a mentor / director and sharing the production and agency throughout that whole experience, but also being kind of a savvy and fussy artist myself, I kind of had to back off as well anyway, and just kind of accept, like, these young people are going to take it off and take the artwork off in their own direction, and that's cool, and we'll just see where they end up. And that, in terms of, like, the interactivity, like, we had kind of discussed some really cool ideas. Like, I wanted it to be kind of a bit more real-time interactive as they're sort of creating their world, and, like, oh, you know, like, the emu's going to be over here. Oh, no, wait a minute. And then, like, literally kind of pick up the emu with their hand and go and place it over here. Like, this feeling like they're lifting up and moving the set pieces around. Wanted to do that, just couldn't figure it out. Like, sometimes you just, like, overloaded with so many technical sort of challenges. So that's kind of one of the reasons where you kind of have to pull your focus in and just go, well, what's the core of the story that we're trying to tell, and what can we actually achieve within our kind of minuscule Australian budget and all that kind of stuff. But we do have a little bit of interactivity, like if you push your controllers into the walls and the emus and the heads of the characters or whatever, they all kind of bulge and wobble, so it always feels like a sort of a dreamlike state. So that was kind of cool, and the transitions between their world, they kind of all unfold and reconstruct in a kind of dreamy, magical transition kind of way. So we kind of ticked off a few of the boxes. It was really fun for the young people to sort of be involved in that process of seeing their little 3D avatars, because that's quite a thing right now, like with the sort of like selfie face filters, and you can become someone else. And I feel like when you... I found that with the projects that I did with these young people before, like they got to design their own characters, they really throw themselves into it. It's like you get to be a superhero or whatever, and you get to decide what your identity is going to be like. And they got to wear costumes, and we went down to Melbourne, and my friend Nixie designed them actual real costumes that match their avatars' costumes as well. So when we did the documentary, we were like, go and put your costume on. You want to look cool and look like your little avatar all the time. So that was super fun. And they, like, when we went to Tribeca, like, we were the best dressed team, I would say.
Yeah,
Definitely.
definitely.
We got a lot of compliments.
Definitely.
That was
You
cool.
look like a band.
Yeah, it was so colourful.
Well, and then you mentioned that you had a screening for the community. So this is then kind of is the question I sort of have for all of you as well in terms of impact. These is you're engaging with youth. You're telling political stories. Stories about environmentalism. What kind of an impact do you think, especially utilizing new technology? Do you think that it enables, that it actually does enable more empathy, a greater engagement? Does it enable more real-world impact? If people are more emotionally, were they very emotionally affected? What was that, to start with the screenings in Australia?
Yeah, so firstly, like the project and a lot of the work that I do in sort of these remote areas is, and bringing technology into these remote areas, especially in a place as vast as Australia, which is like the size of Europe, and we've got, spread out all over the place. It's really rare for any of these remote areas to get access to technology. So right off the bat, we're already making a statement by bringing technology to these areas that don't usually get it. And then we're, the behind-the-scenes documentary, and thanks for showing it alongside the piece, because that's like really important to me, because this is like a really unrepresented area in Australian TV and probably everywhere, where you just don't see Australian Aboriginal people using technology on TV. And then for these young people to then, like, from their little town of 1,000 people to end up in New York at Tribeca, it's just, it meant so much to the community. Like, we had people crying and stuff, like, it was crazy. And then now that's going to show on NITV, which is our national Indigenous television, and then it will get to go on the multicultural network later on in the year as well. And it's just like, it's kind of, we don't really know how we can measure that yet, like the impact of that, but there's like, we're already getting a lot of emails and that from other communities that are just asking how to do that project, and we send the documentary out there, just to give them an idea at least, like we've got these resources now that we can at least send out, and just kind of like, it means so much that it's possible and that these young people have gone and done that. And they, like, 3 of those guys got scholarships and now they're kicking ass. It's like,
That's great. Oh,
yeah.
in technology or animation?
Yeah, they're doing like performing as well, like a lot more performance arts. So they got some performing arts scholarships, 2 of them did. And like there's no pressure, like we're not saying like go and be the VR creators of tomorrow. We're just like go and do what you want to do. But like you also should acknowledge that you've just achieved this piece that's shown at Tribeca, and the same with the other piece that we worked on that's being adapted into a live action series at the moment in Australia, the comic book. Cool. So it's like they've got 2 killer credits on their CV already.
At the end of the day, you're working with teenagers, so just like trying to kind of translate that, how important these things are when you're that age. You're kind of like, okay, it's cool, but like whatever. You know? So like,
but
how do you...
Yeah, it's also combating a really sort of negative coverage of Australian Aboriginal people as well. So, and this is kind of why I I've done like really serious stories in the community, with the community, and then every now and again we just like to do this real light, refreshing, fun. Everyone can look at these young people and just reminded that they are just young people having fun and having access to opportunities as every young person should. Mm-hmm. So that's also the importance of the documentary. And it's funny because like the story doesn't go too deep. It's like into sort of any of the narrative angles too much. But there are little sort of nods there to just kind of recognising kind of where they're at. Like, for example, Nelson 5 years from now decides he's going to be a train driver. Where we live is like right in the middle of the mining sort of boom of Australia. So there's mining infrastructure and companies all around. And it was like kind of a bit predictable, like that kind of response, because that's like if anyone's working in his family, like someone would have drove a train or something, because there's like very few jobs that aren't a part of the mining sector in that area. And I was like, and then like through that process, I was like, oh, okay, so like, how do you feel about mining your own country? Because the traditional owners of this land where we live. And he's like, shit, that was a crap future. Like, he's just like,
I take it back.
Yeah. I was like, it's okay. You got 20 years. You got your 20-year future. You can change it. And it was like just like that. Like in his 20-year future, he was like, okay, so we're not mining my country anymore. We've gone like off-world. We're mining asteroids now. And they're not destroying my beautiful country anymore. So I love that he redeemed himself.
Yeah, he made that change in the project. That's so cool. I never made that connection.
Yeah. It's like you think about the impact that it has. There's that broader impact, and then there's the impact that it has on these young people's lives. And like for me and my wife, like my wife works really closely with me. She's kind of like the kids producer. She's also a lawyer. But for Nelson, for example, I'll just tell you a little story about Nelson. But like Nelson was like an at-risk kid. When we were doing the other project, he missed like a court hearing, and the judge was like, you know, where were you? Why did you miss your court hearing? And then he's like, I was in Canberra meeting the Prime Minister of Australia. The judge is just like, what the fuck? And it's like, so the judge is like, can someone please explain like what's going on here? And my wife was there in the room. She's a lawyer. And she's like, we've been working with Nelson over the last period of months, and he's created this comic book series, and he also did like a live action short film as a part of the comic book series. And then that was seen by a director. And now he's playing the role of John Pat in a National Touring Theatre show. John Pat is a story about a young Aboriginal boy who died in police custody like 20 years ago. And it was a really important case that every judge in Australia would have to learn about as a case study. And so the judge's like mind is just completely blown by this point. And then Nelson would have probably been sent to juvenile prison at that point, because he had some charges that were totally overblown anyway. But and he was so young. So and that was actually the course. Like I'd seen so many young people getting sent to juvenile prison from this town constantly. But in a little moment of revolution, and also like a moment of desperation from behalf of that judge, who wants to find another solution for these young people as well, because he can't just keep sending them down this direction. He decided to sentence Nelson to come and work with us for another 3 months. And then the deal was that he had to keep a diary, and we decided to keep a video diary. And so after 3 months, we went back to the courthouse and we projected that video diary up on the wall. And by the end of it, the judge had tears in his eyes, and he was just like, wiped all the charges and stuff like that.
It's amazing.
So, and Nelson hasn't got in any trouble like since then. And that's already been like 4 or 5 years. Like, so it's just crazy, like give some young people an opportunity.
Transformed his life. Yeah.
Totally, yeah. And Nelson's little brother Maxie's also in it. And Maxie is the governor of another planet. But he's just like totally getting primed to be the mayor of the town right now. And we're like, you don't have to be that, but like you could. Because he's just such a little boss.
That's amazing.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Lawrence and I would love to adapt this for mobile VR. As it stands, it's interactive and it requires a pretty costly computer setup and hardware. And if you're not really dedicated to pursuing VR all the time, it's a big investment. So something like the mobile VR systems like the Quest or the Go, for a cheaper cost, you could access interactive media. So if we can, Lawrence and I still are fundraising for this piece. If we can raise the money to port it to the Quest, that's our plan, so that we could then ship the mobile VR headsets with the project loaded up to communities and travel with it ourselves and show it around. That's like what we'd like to do, but that's a little bit pie in the sky still at this point, because we still have to finish the project as it is.
No, as far as impact, I mean, the reason I made the series as like with the multimedia approach with having different elements was to have like further reach. So having the film, with the film, we organized some secret screenings in Egypt, and I partner with an LGBT rights organization in Egypt that like helped screen it. And then in the Netherlands, like there's an organization that I volunteer with that works mostly with LGBT refugees from the Middle East. And the goal of it was like to have them be able to use it as part of like some events that they organize as well. But and in designing the VR, I wanted to make sure that it could be seen in the Middle East, and with the installation setup, it kind of limits the spaces in which it can be seen sometimes. So we're working on making a 360 version now, that hopefully could live on web also as like web VR element, or will make it easier to travel to different places. And we've been reaching out to different organizations or places in the Middle East to try and have it play there as well. But I think that for me, like one of the, because we started touring at Tribeca in April, and just from traveling around, the biggest sort of impact or feedback that I've been able to see like face to face is just people seem to be really moved with the fact of them being represented or like seeing themselves in it. And I don't think I thought about that as much as like before, because I think for me it was more like telling these stories because I saw what my friends were going through and the people that I knew, and I thought it was really important to show what's happening with like LGBT communities in Egypt and this backlash from the revolution and stuff. But just simple like seeing like yourself as a queer person of color in a story, and especially in a new medium that can, sometimes in technology, I think these narratives can be controlled. I've gotten like a lot of emails or people like crying who come and talk to me and are just like so happy to just see themselves or like an element of story that they can relate to. And I think that's been powerful at like a universal level.
But then ensuring that everyone has access to this technology as it evolves, I think is also really important. And then, of course, all of the social issues that go along with that, so that everyone sort of, I think there's going to be some, that conversation around, obviously human rights and digital rights and